Thank you very much, Daisy. Thank you. Folks, just want to say how honored I am to have an opportunity to chat with all of you today. UC Berkeley is such an incredibly important university institution in the world. And so it really is an honor to have some time to chat with you. I thought we'd talk a little bit about my journey to Microsoft, because I actually think it's pretty different than what you might expect if you look at the slide up there. You see, so I'm 51, so if you guys know, really old. If you go back into the 80s, that was when I first got my first computer. It was a Commodore VIC-20. I assure you the only place you'll ever see it is online or in a museum. It had almost no memory. It was so tough to use. You actually plugged it into a TV. There was no notion of a hard drive. We stored data on cassettes. You probably have never used a cassette. But this was really sort of early in the 80s. But I was your classic geek. I loved computers. And I loved computers because I could create something out of almost nothing. And I spent a lot of my childhood playing with computers, experimenting. So it wasn't a surprise that I ended up at USC studying computer engineering, computer science. But what was a surprise is while I was really good at school in high school, I was not a particularly good university student. Didn't have the right study habits, knew just enough computer science to get myself in trouble, but not enough to excel in classes. And then there was this moment my sophomore year where I was in a computer science class, and all my buddies were telling me about this company called Microsoft. And they were going to apply for internships at Microsoft, and they wanted to know if I wanted to go to the resource group and get an application. So I was like, well, I don't want to go to my next class. So I ended up going with them. We got the application, sent it in, and had absolutely no expectation that I would ever hear back from Microsoft. Because those around me, these were the kids who were getting the 4.0s. These were the kids who just understood algorithm design and all these things I really struggled and had to work extra hard to understand. Played out exactly as you would expect. Everybody else got called back. I got absolutely no love from Microsoft. Many of my friends had the opportunity to fly from Los Angeles to Seattle. They had to spend a day and a half on campus. They did interviews. Unfortunately, they all came back without job offers. And that was a little bummer, but that sort of reminded us of just what the bar was at Microsoft to get hired in the 90s. But then something really weird happened. In April, I think it was about April of that year, Microsoft sent me a mail and said, hey, do you have time to chat? And so I got on the phone with the recruiter, and we talked a little bit about Windows. And this is not even Windows 95. This is Windows 3.1. So we're talking really old, early versions of Windows. And I basically told her it was crap. It was a really bad operating system. And I proceeded to give her all the reasons I didn't like the operating system. It was the one time in my early life that I actually almost didn't care. I was just going to be me. And lo and behold, I actually got an offer to fly to Redmond to interview for an internship. Now, what happened between that meeting and my internship is I took a operating systems class. And I decided that I did not want to write code for a living. And so I called Microsoft and asked if I could switch from an engineering internship or interview to a product management internship. And so they said yes. I flew to Redmond, did reasonably well on the interviews, and ended up getting a job on PowerPoint as an intern in Silicon Valley. I still remember that date in May. I showed up in my blue jeans, my red polo shirt tucked into my pants, scared to death. And my first day, I realized the woman who I was sharing an office with, she went to school at Cornell, pretty good university. Other people who were interning at PowerPoint, University of Michigan, Stanford, Georgia Tech, CMU. And here I was, a C student on a good day from USC, about to compete with all these brilliant people. That was the longest 12 weeks of my life. Every day, I was sure I did not belong. I remember we would have weekly meetings where we would talk a little bit around what we were doing. Hands would sweat, I'd be perspiring, it was a mess. I never wanted to talk in front of the team because I didn't feel like I was there. Now, 30 years later, I understand that's imposter syndrome, and we can talk about that if you want. But I clearly struggled to have confidence that first year. But as I was explaining to Daisy, my solution was to outwork everybody. I was simply going to outwork all the other interns that were there. And of the interns that summer, I was the only one who got a returning job offer. So I went back to USC, studied hard, still didn't do well, C student. Came back for that next internship. And even after having a successful internship, I was still scared. I didn't believe I belonged. I still had imposter syndrome. I still didn't want to talk in front of groups. But I had another 12-week internship, worked again, outworked everybody, and ended up getting a full-time offer for the next summer. So went back to USC. And as crazy as it sounds, I come back as a full-time employee, 2 successful internships. I beat everybody else, and I still did not believe I belonged. And it took a long time for me to really sort of get into my skin at Microsoft. But over the last 28 years as a full-time employee, I went from being an individual contributor to managing an intern. I managed a couple interns to learn what it was like to be a people manager. Then I got a small team of 5 product managers. And then there were a couple of moments in my career where things really changed. And I became the head of product for PowerPoint. A couple of years later, I took responsibility for engineering as well as product, and that's sort of how I became a VP and general manager. And then a couple of years ago, I also took responsibility for Microsoft's Bay Area region. There's about 5,000 employees, 83% of them are engineering. We do all sorts of things, consumer products, commercial products, hardware, software, and I worked with the leaders of those products. And so that's a little sort of quick overview of my path to Microsoft. But I'm always reminded of how I felt as an intern sort of joining Microsoft and then really sort of understanding how I could contribute. And as I was talking to Victoria about the talk today, it reminded me about the journey I was on with storytelling. I believe storytelling is the single most important skill people need to learn in society today. Every year it becomes more and more important. I also think it's one of the undervalued, maybe even underappreciated skills. So the opportunity to know that there's people really focusing on storytelling is incredibly inspiring to me. But I didn't always appreciate storytelling at Microsoft. In fact, it's somewhat ironic, but I didn't understand that storytelling was as valuable as it was until about 4 or 5 years into my career. And I found that weird because when I would interview candidates, I would always ask them a storytelling question. But I did it because that's the way I was interviewed, and so I just kept doing it. But I didn't appreciate the value of storytelling. Until about 5 years into my journey, there was a couple of us who were looking at the Office file formats. And you have to keep in mind that the file formats back in the 90s, this is when you save a presentation, save a Word document, save a spreadsheet. The file on disk used to be essentially a bunch of binary data points. It was effectively a memory dump because we were using really slow machines, not a lot of good hardware. So it had lots and lots and lots of limitations. But at Microsoft, we believed that the file format were our crown jewels. We would never share it with anybody. We certainly wouldn't let people play with it. But a couple of us actually believed that that was the wrong strategy. We thought we should be embracing new technology. We should be embracing interoperability with other vendors. We thought it was time to change the format to drive more capabilities into these products. And every time we went to an executive, we failed. We would get in there, 30 minutes later, they'd tell us, hey, great idea, but we're not going to change the file format in Office. And the breakthrough didn't happen until we found an executive who really understood storytelling. And he took our ideas and he worked with us to craft the story, to make sure that that story was going to resonate with the executives. We were using their language, not ours. We were thinking about it from their perspective and not ours. And it was the breakthrough we needed to change the file format for one of the most important productivity software products in the world. But it only happened because we had somebody to help us navigate really great storytelling. And what was interesting there is once that happened and we understood that we had finally crossed that bridge, the storytelling point really started to resonate with me. And as I reflected on the first 5 years of my career, maybe 6 years of my career, I recognized that so many of my failures were due to storytelling problems. It wasn't necessarily the technical underpinning or the business case. It was we told the wrong story. And one of the earliest examples of this was in my internship. We had a Bill Gates review. These things are like the most important, crazy things you'll ever do at Microsoft. And the story here is that Bill had recognized that we had Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, so these 3 separate products, 3 completely separate code bases, And they each had a text editor, and they each had a graphics editor. And he asked, why am I paying for 3 of these things? Like, why can't we just have one text editor? Why can't we just have one graphics editor? And so the team decided, well, text was too hard. We're going to unify the graphics platform. And so in my internship, I was contributing to the collateral for a Bill G review on how we were going to unify the graphics platforms for Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Now, his whole point was he didn't want to pay for multiples of these. He wanted a single technology stack. We went in there to tell him a story about user experience. We went in there to tell him a story about jobs to be done and all these amazing effects we could do. But the reality is, Bill only cared about the technology. He wanted to understand how we were going to technically unify these stacks. And so that meeting got derailed on slide 2. Probably 2 months of work thrown out, the entire plan for the meeting thrown out, and the team was on their heels responding to Bill in a very reactive mode. And if you've read anything about Bill back in the 90s, these were very intense meetings. And that all came down to the fact that we told the wrong story. He wanted a story about technology, a story about unification. We were in there talking about rotation handles and reflection effects and all these other things that he cares about, but not necessarily for that talk. And so again, so many of the failures that I've seen come down to really bad storytelling. On the flip side, some of my most successful moments at Microsoft came down to spot on storytelling. And we'll talk a little bit about that and a little bit about Copilot. But storytelling is one of these things that I don't think we pay attention to enough as society, but it is vitally important. It's so important in my particular case that when we were choosing which private school my daughter was going to go to, one of the things I was trying to understand is how much presentation experience is she going to get? How much storytelling coaching is she going to get? Because you've got to start early. You'd be shocked at how you can change the direction of your life, your career, your family, your friend group, your soccer team, your Girl Scouts program by really, really great storytelling. And so when I think about storytelling, again, it is one of these things where I just don't think we value it enough. When I think about myself as an executive, my perspective has also shifted a little bit. The 2 biggest problems I see when people come and give me their story is that they're not succinct. And what's really fascinating is, it takes a while, but like when I was in university, you would explain your process. Here's everything we've done, and here is the net result. Here's the conclusion. But when you're talking to an executive, you've got to flip that. You've got to hit that executive right off the bat with, this is the conclusion, this is the takeaway, this is the action. An executive is not going to wait for the journey. If the executive is curious, they'll ask about the journey. If they maybe doubt the conclusion, maybe they'll ask about the journey. But when you're thinking about giving a story to an executive, you really have to get to the facts, get to the takeaway as quickly as you possibly can. I would say this is the #1 thing that we see, especially earlier in career people struggle with at Microsoft. The other thing, and the more you storytell, the less likely this one happens, is a lot of times people will simply regurgitate facts. So they will have a slide that will just say net promoter score for PowerPoint and a whole table of data. As an executive, my response is, and so what? What is the conclusion? What is your insight? What's the analysis that you've generated? And so you got to keep in mind that storytelling has to be targeted at the individual, targeted at the role that they play. One thing Microsoft did that had nothing to do with storytelling, but actually influenced storytelling at Microsoft, is we sent a lot of our employees through what we call insights training. And this is this like psychology test you can take. They're all over the internet. But what it does is it describes you in terms of colors. So you might be red dominant. I happen to be red dominant, which is the tagline is, be brief, be bright, be gone. And that's actually the way that, just inherently, I run my exec reviews. Give me the answer, let's figure this out, and let's move on to the next problem. But if you go and you present to one of my peers who happens to be blue energy, a blue energy person really wants to wallow in the data and really think about, what does the data say? You got to build a completely different presentation or a different story for a blue energy executive than a red energy executive. And this actually has created, once you understand the colors of the executives, you can actually start to figure out how to really optimize your communication style for them. which is maybe the last point I'll touch on storytelling, which is one of the things you also have to keep in mind is that when you go outside of a company, so there's one school of thought for how you do storytelling internally, but if you go and start talking to the media is very, very different. And this was a somewhat painful and embarrassing growth moment for me. I thought I was a really good speaker. I speak in front of a bunch of people until I went to media training. And they sent me to media training, and they asked me to give a presentation on the Silicon Valley campus. Now, this is something that I was involved in from the ground up. I know all the statistics, I know the stories, the history, the whole thing. And they let me go for 10 minutes. And the instructor stopped me and said, that is the most boring talk I have ever seen. Because I was running it like a review with an executive. Let me tell you the statistics. Let me tell you the history, all of this data sheet kind of stuff. And he said, okay, Shawn, now let's try it again, but I just want to hear you tell stories. And it completely changed the narrative, telling stories about the people coming and going, the stories of people doing walking one-on-ones on the rooftop garden, serendipitous meetings at the barista. As soon as I started talking about stories, now we've got a storytelling experience that works for the media. And that has really sort of, it's always in the back of my head, who am I talking to? If it's an executive, it's probably going to be data focused, get to the point very fast. If it's media, it's probably going to be more about stories, the human element, my personal experiences. And so you really have to be thoughtful about what's going to resonate with your audience. The other thing I had to learn is that in exec reviews, you have to be very direct and honest. In media, sometimes you don't actually answer the question that they ask. And being able to understand, like, hey, this is the story that I want to tell, and maybe it's a little different than the question that they're answering, is also, I think, a really important part of storytelling based on showing, optimizing for your audience. And one of the reasons I care a lot about storytelling, aside from running PowerPoint, is that when I think about Microsoft the last couple of years, I think one of our high points has really been storytelling at the company. I assume everybody here has heard about Copilot, or at least AI, Claude, Sonnet. Okay, so fair number of people. So Copilot is Microsoft's AI-based personal assistant for you, and we've put it everywhere. So if you use Teams or Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, you probably have run into Copilot at some point. And we're about 2 years in our Copilot journey, and the storytelling for Copilot, I think, is the best storytelling in the absolute history of Microsoft. And so we have to sort of rewind the clock a little bit, maybe 2 or maybe 3 years ago. We had always been tracking AI. Everybody in the tech industry has been tracking AI. AI has been going for maybe 70 years. It started in Dartmouth in the 50s. But there was a moment where AI completely changed. All of a sudden, the things that you thought were 5 years out were now 6 months out. They were still super hard, but they were now possible. And so we started to rethink, what is this going to mean for the company? What is this going to mean for society? What is this going to mean for our products? And we scrambled a huge chunk of the organization, trying to figure out how are we going to bring AI to presentations and spreadsheets and Word documents and so on. And everything was sort of business as usual early on. But where things got really inspiring was when we started talking about our go-to-market strategy. How are we going to talk to people about these AI advances? Now, you have to keep in mind the context we found ourselves in was one that I would describe as a frenzy. Everybody who was running a tech company, startup to the largest enterprise, was heralding the opportunity that AI presented. They were talking it was going to change society, the greatest change any of us would ever experience. And being in Silicon Valley, we know we love hyperbole. So everybody was trying to out-talk everybody else about the power of AI and how they were going to take advantage of it. But Microsoft, in a moment of, I believe, brilliance, basically told everybody, this is our moment to be humble. We are not going to tell everybody that this is the most amazing thing ever and tomorrow the world's going to change. We are going to sit there and we are going to be humble about what it can and can't do. And this was so out of the norm of every CEO, every major company embracing AI at the time. And it was brilliant because Satya and the extended leadership team at Microsoft understood that, yes, AI is going to be the single largest disruption any of us will experience in our lifetime. But the path to that disruption was going to be very rocky. There was going to be difficulty managing expectations. There were going to be cases where our maybe competitors were going to run faster than we were by cutting corners. There were going to be issues where the AI was not going to work the way we think it should work. We call those hallucinations. And so we also recognized that regulators were going to get involved. And I took a picture. There's that bench that's in that grassy area there. There is a sign that says "Stop AI." I took a picture of it because that was part of the story we had with Copilot, is we knew that a change like this, there were going to be some people who really don't like AI. My wife happens to be one of them, as ironic as that is. But we recognized that there were going to be a lot of headwinds telling an AI story, so we wanted to be humble. And if you look at the early conversations we had with folks about Copilot, it was mostly, we're going to go on a journey together. We're going to experiment and learn. We're going to be very focused on responsibility. We're going to be very careful about how we proceed, but we're going to proceed together. And I think that humility that we showed, very, very rare in a tech industry, set us up to weather all of the problems we ran into. We did have cases where you would ask Copilot a question, and it would give you the wrong answer. And we got grace from people because we told them that was going to happen. I spent probably every week for the first year presenting to C-suite executives. And one of the slides I had was showing generative image capabilities. And this is basically the idea that you type in a prompt and you say, show me the picture of a border collie in front of the Seattle Space Needle. And it would generate 4 pictures of the border collie in front of the Seattle Space Needle. And that worked great. And then I would say, well, let's put a hat on the dog. And it would re-render everything and put a hat on the dog. But at some point in my presentation, I said, put a ball in the dog's mouth. Well, 3 of the pictures rendered perfectly, but the 4th one rendered the ball in the dog's face. So that was a very clear example where the AI system just wasn't mature enough to fully render all the things we could think about. And so as we ran into these things, because we showed a little bit of humility here, we got a little bit of a grace. The other thing I think we did incredibly well from a storytelling perspective was the naming of the product. You cannot imagine how much we debate product names at Microsoft, but this one, the stakes were so much higher. There were people who were talking about, AI is almost like an autopilot, where it will just do things on your behalf. It will be magical. It will solve all these problems. And we didn't think that was the philosophy we wanted to use as we started embracing AI. And so we very intentionally called it a co-pilot. It is there to help you. It is not there to replace you. It is there to react to your whims, for you to tell it what to do. And I think as we've navigated the last 2 years, we keep going back and reminding people about the name. The name tells you everything you want to know about our philosophy around AI. This is a complementary tool. It's not a replacement tool. And so when I go and I talk to people and we have conversations around fear of AI replacing jobs, displacing people, we can often talk about the role that AI is this complement to human beings, not a replacement for human beings. Maybe the last thing I'll say on Copilot, just because not everything is rosy, is we did one really bad thing, and I'm going to take accountability for this on the PowerPoint side, is we mismanaged expectations. I mentioned that this was one of the things we were worried about as we were telling our Copilot story. But if you look at the videos that we put together for what Copilot and PowerPoint would be able to do, they were beautiful videos, they were inspiring, they were awesome, and we didn't know how to write all of that code. And so for 1.5 years, we kept showing people these videos. They kept looking at the product and trying to say, how are these two things the same? And what we ran into tension where the organizations at Microsoft were not aligned on outcomes. So my team was all aligned on building the best AI product we could, and the marketing folks were all about getting impressions in news pages and newspaper articles and TV and internet postings. And so we were looking at 2 different incentive systems, and that caused our marketing material to tell wonderful stories that were probably a little bit too far ahead of the product. And at some point that came to roost, and that was sort of my issue to go and work with folks to resolve. But I'm still not convinced it was actually the wrong thing to do, because we had to start telling the world our vision for where we thought AI would take us, how we thought Copilot would help them become more productive, help them get out of the mundane work, get into more of the creative work. So we'll end up seeing a Harvard Business Review at some point that will sort of dissect Copilot. But managing expectations was one area where our storytelling just frankly, we did not do a good job. And frankly, we are still sort of paying for that a little bit. I was telling Daisy I spent a lot of time with customers. And I've got a small set of customers who I have to talk to all the time because they keep calling me, reminding me, remember that video, I still don't have that button in PowerPoint Copilot. So these are, it's a good reminder for me that when you mess up your storytelling, you often can't fix it immediately. It may take you months, if not years, to fix the storytelling, depending upon the storytelling challenge that you created. So that is sort of a quick take on a little bit of my background, sort of my incredible belief about storytelling, and some of the lessons we've seen at Microsoft as it relates to Copilot. The thing I would love more than anything else is just to open it up to Q&A. I was going to tell Daisy, the reason I love doing these is I come away learning more from you folks than you will learn from me. The questions you ask, the things you're worried about, it's just a gift. So please be very unfiltered. I've worked at Microsoft for 28 years. I've been accused of everything. So please be pretty direct with your feedback and questions.
So we have 45 minutes for questions, which
Cool.
is the longest we've had. I keep getting feedback from you all that we don't have enough time for questions, so thank you. I wrote down, be brief, be bold, but don't be gone yet.
Yeah, I'm working on that one.
Well, we have the static microphone over there, and I have this, so raise your hands as you have questions. And as I'm moving, I just wanted to point to two kind of incredible things today. One, I wanted to thank Daisy for that introduction, which I don't know how, but you seem to have memorized that. And if you recall, a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was a week ago, when Lisa was talking, she talked about the importance of that and the power of that. So I wanted to thank you. And then two, I wish that all of you all will one day be able to hold a casual conversation the way Shawn has, knowing I knew exactly what he wanted to cover. I'm not sure how you do that in your head. I don't know if you have those 4 buckets that you want to cover, but that makes you bold and brief, and it was pretty phenomenal. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, questions. And I would say that Shawn will not be nervous about talking about mistakes. And I know all of us have used Microsoft.
Oh, perfect.
Hey, Shawn. Really like the talk. One of the things I personally got out of it was understanding that you really need to optimize what you're saying depending on who you're speaking to. I thought what you said about different colors to executives was interesting. And you said you have to kind of figure out what color the executive is. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. How would you go about figuring out what kind of person the executive is?
Yeah, I do a talk a couple times a year for new employees at Microsoft. And the talk is really about best practices for presenting at Microsoft. And one of my suggestions is you need to go learn about the person you're presenting to. And so the answer to your question is very simple. Go find somebody who works for that person or who has already presented to that person. And you will be shocked at the insight a very quick 5-minute conversation can have. In my years at Microsoft, I had 2 managers, one right after the other, who could not have been further apart in terms of the presentations that they wanted. The first one, he wanted everything as fast as he could get it. So black text, white background, come in with partially thought ideas. We're going to have a conversation to move the business forward. If I came into that presentation, into a meeting with Jeff, and I had a presentation that looks like I spent 2 months and hired some Hollywood producer to get, he would have given me some very harsh feedback that I probably was not using my time wisely. At the same time, my very next boss was Joe Belfiore. And Joe is one who is all about the details. And so by the time you get to Joe, every word counts. The colors count, the layout counts, everything counts. And so if I had gone into a meeting with Joe with a deck that I had built for Jeff, I would have gotten a different set of feedback. And so the answer is to simply go ask people. Just actually, I think it was today's Tuesday. on Monday this week, I run the Microsoft Bay Area Board of Directors for the Bay Area. It's basically myself, 7 corporate vice presidents, and we effectively sort of set priorities for the Microsoft Bay Area region. Well, we have a new executive vice president, so think Satya direct report, Jay Parikh, and he is at Microsoft. He's based in the Bay Area. It's very rare for an executive vice president to be based in the Bay Area, but we met with him for the first time as a board, and I was doing a bunch of intelligence before we got into that room. Hey, how does Jay process things? How do I know when Jay has conviction or Jay is just brainstorming ideas aloud? And so I went and talked to people, and I had 3 or 4 conversations. The total time of those conversations less than 30 minutes, but I had a really good sense of what's going to work for Jay. So just go ask. You may not get somebody to say, well, it's red energy or green energy, but you'll get a couple of best practices pretty quickly.
Hi, my name is Max. I want to thank you for coming out. I think you're the first speaker we've had who's like a large publicly traded company. So my question to you was, how does internally the board and executives manage expectations around stock price, and how does that affect your decision? Because I imagine you need a long-term goal for growth, but at the same time, you need to somewhat take into account short-term changes as well.
Yeah, so I think that's a question that frankly is much better for our chief financial officer, but I'll give you a little bit of insight as somebody who runs a team that has some high expectations from a financial results perspective. So it is very clear at my level, my boss's level, and her boss's level about what our business needs us to deliver both short-term and long-term. So as you can imagine, with so much focus on artificial intelligence, companies like Microsoft, as well as our peer companies in the Valley, we are spending billions building data centers, because without data centers, your AI is simply not going to run. And so if we're spending billions on data centers, we have to provide an in-kind contribution back to the business in terms of licensing or services or whatnot. And so I have very clear targets for what I need to deliver on various timeframes. Now, what's interesting, though, is because I do not have what's called a P&L, a profit loss statement, because I'm part of the office organization, I do not have a dollar value I have to provide. But what I have to provide is I have to provide growth. So I have what we call monthly active user targets for Copilot. And so we look at the commercial business, and I can tell you on basically any day how many people are using Copilot and PowerPoint, and I have a target that I have to hit. And so we track these things through a monthly review called a monthly product review with my boss. We look at it from the commercial segment. We look at it from the small and medium-sized business segment. We look at the consumer segment. And so that is the way that I contribute to the financial results of the company. Maybe the other thing that's probably more important now than ever is we also look at cost of goods and services, so COGS. So I can tell you when you are rendering a PowerPoint presentation in the web, I can tell you exactly how many sessions, I can tell you exactly how much it costs to do 1 million of those sessions. I can tell you the difference between a viewing scenario and an editing scenario, because I have to look at all the money I'm spending, both in human capital, so salaries, but also running all those services. And I can tell you exactly what that's costing, because that's going to take money off the top of the books. So those are the two things: cost of goods and services, COGS, as well as growth targets. And then Amy Hood, who's a brilliant CFO, she deals with Wall Street and all that kind of good stuff.
I'm struck by the fact that you did not think that you would get a job at Microsoft, but then you got it twice, it sounds like.
Yeah.
What have you heard over the years in terms of good stories and maybe stories that could be improved from people that you're interviewing?
In terms of Microsoft?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, maybe I'll answer a slightly different question to put all this in context. When I...
Do you feel like I'm needy in it?
I'll get to the answer. When I joined Microsoft in the summer of '99, I was probably 2 weeks on the job, and my roommate, she had made some friends. They were all going to go on a hike, and she wanted to know if I wanted to go with her. So we get there, we get in the car, we drive, we get to the parking lot, we get out, we say our hellos, meet everybody, and we start this hike. Everybody at the start of the hike is incredibly nice. We're chatting, and then somebody asked me, "Hey, Shawn, where do you work?" And I said, I work at Microsoft. Everybody stopped hiking. They all turned around and looked at me like I had the plague. Because back in '96, Microsoft was known as the evil empire. It was seen as a company that was running over other companies, destroying companies. And frankly, we had a bit of a bad reputation. And so I would say there was a period where you had to have some pretty thick skin because people thought you were maybe not acting in accordance with social norms, or you were entering into bad business practices or whatnot. But there were lots of cases where I was ostracized because I worked at Microsoft. Like people simply didn't want to hang out with you, didn't want to talk to you. And then there was a period of sort of 10 years of almost irrelevance. And this was in maybe the early 2000s, where everybody was fleeing big tech for startups. And I remember people just sort of ignored Microsoft. We would go to recruiting events and people were like, I'd rather go work for this other cool tech company. And that was about 10 years. And so I would say that the interviewing sort of went the same way, is you'd have a lot of people turn you down. You would extend them an offer, and there was always a reason why they would go maybe to another company. The good news is the people who stayed loved the company. They understood the big picture. They understood the values of the company, the philosophy. But there have been lots of moments in those 28 years where it was frankly hard to work at Microsoft. But I will tell you that under Satya's leadership, in particular the last 10, I think maybe 11 years, it is the coolest place in the world to work. It feels like we are running a startup at a Microsoft global scale. People are able to have more agency than they've ever had. We are running faster. We are challenging each other to do more, to work better, to work differently. And so I would say that the interviews today, we're turning people away because people want to join Microsoft. And I think it's this combination of how we've approached AI, Satya's leadership, and really sort of turning the company around. But yeah, I mean, there are moments where people did not, it was really, really hard to even get them to interview.
Could you all introduce yourself also, just because there's one Shawn and many of you?
Thanks. First of all, thank you for your presentation. My name is Matthew, and I'm studying abroad here in UC Berkeley for the next 6 months. And I have a question for you related to my last internship. We use a lot PowerPoint. And first of all, sorry for the resources, because we do 263 slides and we're working on 40 people on it. So maybe the resources is not good. But I have a question, because we have many times this debate about to have great storytelling if we need to do very short slides, bold and brief one, but a lot of slides with a lot of animations and transitions to do something very dynamic. Or if we need to do something like less slides, but way bigger slide inside with more information. I would like to have your point of view on it, because I think you are the best person to give me the best advice for it.
Yeah, so I'll talk about it sort of in two ways. One is I'll talk about sort of my philosophy on this, and then maybe how it pulls into the co-pilot conversation. So the short answer is there is no simple solution that will solve everybody's problems in every context. So rather, it is more about who are you talking to? What are you trying to accomplish? Do you know, it gets back to the gentleman's question about how do I know who I'm speaking with or who the target audience is? Because depending upon their familiarity with your topic, depending upon whether or not they're inclined to agree with you, you may need either fewer slides or more slides. Now, I will tell you personally, as I have gotten to become a better presenter over my career, I use fewer slides than I did early on. We all use slides as crutches, right? We're going to put everything on the slide. If we get scared, if we get flustered, we look at the slide and we can simply read it. And so there is a little bit of comfort in having a lot of content. But what I find is the more content you put on the slides, the less the audience is listening to you, and now they're reading. The other thing, and you'll see this at executive reviews all the time, I tell people, every single character that gets presented to an executive is fair game. So if you have a whole bunch of net promoter score data, and you have it on the slide, and you want to talk about June, but there's some weird number in October, the executive is going to ask you about the number in October because it's going to stand out. And so less is more in almost all cases. Now you do have to think a little bit around, are you going to distribute the presentation afterwards? Because sometimes the leave behind is really, really important. Now, if you've got time, we actually tell you to build 2 decks, one for the presentation and one for the leave behind, but sometimes that's not practical. But I would also say you can go too far in terms of having really, really sparse slides. So there was a period in my career where I was playing around with different presentation styles. So there's the Steve Jobs, arguably one of the best presenters in all of history, where he would have beautiful pictures on his slides. So there's a period where I gave a bunch of beautiful picture slide presentations at Microsoft. I tried the Lawrence Lessig example, where it's just text that's flying on the slide super quickly, and a couple of other different examples. The problem was I did one of those Steve Jobs presentations, and my boss's boss wanted my presentation because he couldn't be in the review. Well, if you just have a bunch of slides with a bunch of pictures, there's no data, there's no narrative, and so there was no way for him to be able to consume what I had actually created for the team. So you got to be really situational. You got to really be focused on who you're talking to, what you're trying to do. But in almost all cases, less is more. Put in the speaker notes. And so so let's talk a little bit about Copilot. One of our goals for PowerPoint is to be able to make it so you don't have to ask that question. So with Copilot, what we want to do is we want to understand who you're presenting to, what the history is, what the topic is, even what the room dynamics are. Do we have big windows in here? But we want to be able to really understand everything about the context of your presentation and then help guide you towards the right presentation. And in some cases, we would guide you to a very information-dense presentation. Other cases, we may guide you to a less dense presentation. But Copilot and PowerPoint will evolve over time to do this. If you happen to use Copilot today, I would describe Copilot and PowerPoint as reactive. So if you boot PowerPoint and do nothing different, you're going to get the exact same PowerPoint experience. And so you have to press the Copilot button to ask it to do something on your behalf. What we're going to do, and you'll start to see this in the next couple months, is we're going to move to more of a proactive Copilot. So we're going to watch you work in a very safe way. We're not like snooping, but we're going to just sort of watch how you're using the product. And when we believe that we can add value for you, we're going to bring up a task pane that says, hey, you might consider one of these choices. And that's how we're going to steer people towards a really good outcome without having to have you think about, boy, should it be 5 slides or 10 slides or 100 slides? The last thing I'll say before we get to the gentleman's question is, by one ask, do not build slides that will not be presented. That's the #1 thing you got to keep in mind. And at Microsoft, we are horrible at this. I remember going into a Satya review. It was a review with Satya and his leadership team. We must have had 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes. We built a 150-slide presentation. The amount of money Microsoft spent on probably 140 slides that weren't going to get talked about was ridiculous. And so we really, really have to be careful. If you're going to build a slide, you have to have a lot of confidence that it's going to be used. Because otherwise, you're just wasting your time, and you don't have time to waste.
Hey, my name is Jürgen. I'm a CS student. And I'm actually curious for the first one, though. You said your whole career at Microsoft.
Yeah.
At one big company.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that to us for soon going into the workplace? Or?
Yeah, so I think it's, again, it comes down to the opportunities that are presented to you. So when I started at Microsoft, maybe 2 or 3 years in, there were a bunch of opportunities I had to go join startups. And I went so far as to go talk to startup founders and have dinner and went to Los Angeles and talked to a bunch of them. But at the end of the day, I looked at what I was doing at Microsoft and I said, I'm having a greater impact here and I'm learning more here. And while the startup was interesting because we all dream of the big startup IPO and being rich, the value just wasn't greater than what I was getting at Microsoft. The reason I've stayed at Microsoft, and I've been very clear with every manager I've ever had, I will quit if I stop learning and I stop having fun. It is that simple. If those two conditions can't be met, I simply will leave. And so over 28 years, you look at the highlights there, it looks like I've had one job on one product in one discipline for 28 years. But over that time, I have done mergers and acquisitions. I have worked with the Department of Justice antitrust cases. I have worked with international standards bodies. So I have played probably maybe 15, 16 different roles over that 28-year time span. And it's one of the advantages of a large company. And that's not just unique to Microsoft. You go to another big, large company that maybe sits in Mountain View, they'll give you the same opportunity. There are lots of ways to be with a single company and play different roles and learn different capabilities. So I'm not going to give you guidance one way or the other than to say, understand what's valuable to you. For me, I want to have fun and I want to learn. And I want that every day. So for me, that's the thing that guides me. And so far, the equation hasn't required me to leave Microsoft. You bet.
Got one question in the middle here.
Hey Shawn, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. My name is João, I'm from Brazil, also an exchange student here. My question is about this dilemma of working on the foundational model layer versus the application layer. So you have this discussion if teams should be focusing on both training techniques or like fine-tuning reinforcement learning, or if they should focus more on the bottlenecks of a more system level design on how to build applications or distribute agents and stuff. So if you were like a developer or a founder, in which one would you focus on, and which ones do you think are the main bottlenecks, both in the foundational model layer and in the application layer, to like unlock the next level of AI?
Yeah, the short answer is you don't get to choose. You have to do both. It's one of we call it the tyranny of the or. Everybody wants to position every question that comes to us. Do I want to go A or do I want to go B? My boss will often come to me and tell me, hey, we need to do this particular thing. And my instinct is, great, well, I have no more additional resources. Everybody's working their butts off all the time. So what am I gonna cut? I'm gonna say, instead of this, I'm gonna do this. I don't get to have that conversation. I have to get creative. I have to find ways of being able to do both. So to your point, we need people working on those foundational models. We also need people working on the system. And one of the big learnings that I've had over the last couple of years is I had in my head that I was going to take this engineering team I have, which I believe is one of the best engineering teams in the world, but they are software engineers. They're not AI engineers. And I thought I would need to hire a bunch of AI specialists and that they would sort of run independently. And what I'm realizing is the most valuable people are the people who have the AI skills and who can really do hardcore software programming. And the wonderful thing that I've learned is, yes, I can hire people with software skills, but I can also upskill all the existing software engineers I have. They're incredibly brilliant people. They're super motivated, great intellectual horsepower, great at problem solving. And so for me, it's more about building a portfolio of employees where I've got people who can do the fine-tuning model, and I've got people who can actually do the system level, application level programming. And in fact, if anything on my team, more and more of our fine-tuning model work will end up going to more shared teams. We do fine-tuning in PowerPoint, so we play around with 4.0 and 0.1 and the reasoning models. But I would say it's a relatively small piece of our engineering effort, and it's really focused on sort of a narrow block of some of our AI work. So yeah, unfortunately, as a startup founder, you got to be able to do both.
And which ones do you think are the main bottlenecks nowadays in both the application layer and in the functional layer?
As somebody who built software for multiple decades, I would guess the system thing, but I tell you, I am constantly blown away by the model advances. And so I don't necessarily say I would call those bottlenecks, but I think the next big thing is going to be more about these foundational models. I think that's where a lot of the industry-wide changes will happen. Yep.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Caroline. I just wanted to know, as the VP and GM of PowerPoint, what has been the most unexpected challenge that you faced in leading the product, and how did you navigate it?
The most unexpected challenge? I would say two things. I would say one, Back in 2003, 2004, we were looking at PowerPoint and looking at what I would call state-of-the-art visual communication was like. So the effects, the way that we would render fonts and objects. And we believed that our technology was just not, it was no longer best of breed. And so we effectively took PowerPoint completely apart. And when you do that, given the way that Office is built, it requires us to take part of Excel apart and part of Word apart. And we got a little over our skis. We had a little bit too much confidence that we could put this thing back together, make it better than before. And we missed an enormous number of checkpoints with our executive team. And there was a moment where we could put Word and Excel back together, but we actually could not build PowerPoint. Now think about that for a minute. We have taken one of the most important products on the planet and we can no longer build it because we've got it in pieces. And you can imagine that was not tolerated very long at Microsoft. We ended up replacing head of engineering, head of product, but it was one of those things where for a while there, our entire confidence was shaken. We were the team that swung for the fences. We were the team that could see the impossible. And we had gotten out over our skis and put the entire Office franchise at risk. And so getting out of that, putting it all back together, hitting deadlines, was perhaps one of the greatest challenges that I've been a part of on the PowerPoint team. A little closer to home, or at least time-wise, the advances of AI are mind-blowing. It is like we joke that the plan on Monday is probably not the plan on Friday. And God help us come next Monday because we never know what happens on the weekends. Like the advances of the last 2 weekends have been mind-blowing with some of this agentic work that was announced a couple of days ago. Every day, the state of AI changes. And so for us to be able to think about where is PowerPoint going in the next 6 months, the next 9 months, it is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And then the complication of this is that every one of these changes sort of captures everybody's attention for a while. And so we've got to decide which one do we chase, like which one is really salient, which one's going to change the world, and which one's going to be a bit of a flash in the pan, because we can't chase everything. But I would say the state of AI change, it makes your brain hurt. It's hard to track. It's that fast.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate your ability to storytell and touch points that you gave us today. I'm curious, with Microsoft's new chip making what hard skills does your team now look for that they didn't previously?
Yeah, so the reference is the new quantum chip that we announced maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Honestly, my team has nothing to do with that. That was a very specialized effort that was done, some of it in the Bay Area, some of it in Redmond, but we actually had nothing to do with that. So that's not actually changing the way we are looking for candidates in terms of skill set. I'm sure that if you were to go interview with those teams, there'd be a whole different conversation. But I think if you think about Word, Excel, PowerPoint, we are still looking for more of the intangibles. Are you hardworking? Can you problem solve? Do you have the intellectual horsepower, the curiosity, problem solving, collaboration, the ability to negotiate? We look more for those kind of skills because I can teach you any programming language. Like that's not the problem. But what I need is that inherent set of skills and traits that you can be successful at Microsoft. So yeah, we unfortunately are not involved in the quantum stuff. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk earlier. So my name is Chen. I'm a master's student studying mechanical engineering. I'm curious about given the competitive landscape with tools like Google Slides and Canva, how does the Microsoft PowerPoint team approach innovation and differentiation? And are there any cases where you learn from these competitive products? And how do you maintain your own unique value proposition?
Yeah, you highlight a really important thing, which is it's easy to look at our numbers and get complacent. So if you look at we have hundreds of millions of people who use PowerPoint. If you look at penetration numbers within the enterprise, it's incredibly high. There are a lot of metrics that in theory should make me sleep incredibly well at night. But my message to the team is we need to be humble. Every single major competitor that you talked about, as well as I could write 50 more on the board, exist, they are successful, and there's something we can learn from them. So when we think about the presentation space, my challenge to my team is I want to know this competitor, what are we learning from them? Why are they successful? Why do they exist? Why did somebody spend the time to build that product? Why are usually tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people using that? In fact, I had the worldwide PowerPoint leadership team fly into California on Sunday, and we spent the last day and a half doing a big planning offsite. And one of the gentlemen who runs one of the product management teams gave a whole talk about the competition. And it was all about these insights. What can we learn? The second we believe we have all the answers, we're dead in the water. Guarantee you. Like, put the gravestone out. Like, as soon as that happens, we're dead. So we are always looking for inspiration from our competitors. In fact, one of the really important moments in my career, when I became head of product for PowerPoint, my manager challenged me to reach out to the CEOs of some of these small startup competitors to PowerPoint and start meeting them. And I remember when he asked me, I was like, what the hell am I going to talk to these guys about? Like, oh, here's my secret roadmap. And he said, just go and have a conversation with them. And what I've learned is, you know, the media likes to make it sound like we're all going at each other. But the reality is we're actually very collaborative. And we share insights. Hey, I'm seeing this. What are you seeing? And so it's not quite as competitive as you might think. But I think we should always be looking at competitors and really asking ourselves, what can we learn from them?
You can do the question up front, we'll kind of back
Yeah.
up and forth.
Hey, Ronit here.
Can you turn on the mic,
Oh, yes.
please?
Is it better?
Yes.
Hi, Ronit here. You've obviously climbed the very long ladder of Microsoft work hierarchy, right? And that doesn't come without being different in some way. What about you and your philosophy has allowed you to thrive?
Yeah, I was mentioning this to Daisy before we got started. I grew up in Stockton, California, so I grew up in farmland. My dad installed carpeting for a living. My mom worked at JCPenney's for a while. She volunteered in the school. We lived paycheck to paycheck. And I grew up, you know, being surrounded by people who had really cool shoes and Swatch watches, and they were going to Tahoe to go skiing. My family didn't get to do any of those things. My dad, if he could get extra hours, he would work at night and take odd jobs and do whatever he needed to for the family. The consequence of this is that in my family, hard work is the thing we value more than anything else. And that's been the secret sauce. I will simply outwork you. I will not be as smart as you. You will probably be faster than I will, but I will outwork every single person I encounter. And so I think that was the philosophy I took into my internships. I mean, I'm a C student at USC. I'm competing against like CMU, Berkeley, Stanford, MIT. I'll just outwork you. And that got me through the 2 internships, got me, you know, sort of going as a full-time employee. Now I think I'm a little smarter. I know that there's a little bit of like work smarter, not harder. But I do think it is that work ethic that plays a role. I also have learned over the years to really put my ego aside. I have imposter syndrome. So every time I get up in front of people or go to a super important meeting, man, I'm sweating. I'm like, oh shit, they're gonna realize I don't know what I'm talking about. Like it's really bad. But I've learned that I can just set my ego aside and just handle the situation. And one of the things I think if you were to ask people at Microsoft about my brand, it is that I take accountability for when I screw up. I would be the first one to be in front of all 300-400 people in PowerPoint and say, hey, I sent you down the wrong route. Like this was, I evaluated the situation incorrectly. Here's what I've learned. Here's what we're gonna do. I think those are the 2 things. Hard work, and then just put your ego aside, take accountability for your mistakes.
Hi, thanks for the talk. My name is Arvind. I had a question, like since you work with all the 3 CEOs, Bill, Balmer, and Satya, what is the unique set of like quality Bill have and Balmer and like Satya have? And like one thing which they may lack or something like that, which can like make them even greater.
Yeah. So 3 CEOs. The way I would describe it is Bill, the secret with Bill was technology. He understood the potential of technology. He understood how the technology could be put together in ways of generating a bunch of value. And so when I joined Microsoft as an intern and full-time, we were a hardcore tech company. like straight up. Like it was all about technology. And I would say our technology is better than anybody else in the industry. But Bill brought that technical acumen. When he transitioned to Steve, Steve was not a technologist. Steve was a numbers guy. And I didn't have a lot of interactions with Steve, but he was the business guy. He knew all the numbers better than anybody else. So he could find ways of optimizing our business. He could find opportunities for us to expand. He understood when to cut bait when something wasn't working. And so for him, it was really about a numbers game. We're going to take the system we have and we're going to eke out every bit of opportunity to optimize it that we can find. For Satya, Satya's magic is culture. And it sounds cliche, but his entire approach to growth mindset changed the company. And he established from day one that it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'm going to go find out. He also said it very, very clear. He was cleaning house of brilliant jerks. If you could not get along with your peers, you were out. If you didn't espouse the values that we decided were going to be important for that company, you were out. And he empowered his managers to do the same thing. And it was a pretty radical shift. When I started at Microsoft, I remember being on a call with the Windows team, and I could hear somebody pounding on the desk because they were mad at a decision. That's intolerable in Satya's Microsoft. Satya's Microsoft is one of curiosity, one of collaboration. And it's really kind of fascinating. When Satya took over, I had a competitor who reached out to me and said, hey, we've got a question about PowerPoint file format. And I was like, great, let's do a phone call. And so we get on this video call, and it's this individual who I knew and a couple people who worked for him. And they're explaining to me this problem. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And then they tell me, well, we went through the support program at Microsoft, and we got a dead end, and this whole thing. And I was like, well, why are you not just calling me? I'll just tell you the answer. And I got a 6,000-page technical doc that I'll give you that will tell you exactly how to code what you're talking about. And they all stopped. And they were like, we need to go on mute for a second. So they mute the thing. They turn around so I can't lip read. They have a conversation. They come back. And they're like, okay, what's the catch? Are you trying to get us to use your intellectual property so that you can take our source code? Are you trying to trick us into something? And I was like, no. My customers benefit if they can take their presentations and put them into your product. And my customers also benefit if they happen to be a customer of yours to take your file and put it into my presentation. So we're incentivized to work together. That is quintessential Satya. Like, it's not a zero-sum game. We can work together and do really great things. So I think that's what it comes down to. Bill was all about tech. Steve was all about optimization, numbers, running the business. And Satya is all about culture. And I think that's why Microsoft's going through a renaissance now, is Satya has redefined the company at its most core values.
Is there anything they lack?
Well, like, we're all human, right? Like, we can all do better. I'm not going to go into details, but like, I sort of look at it as they each bring this incredible strength, and they've matured. I mean, yeah, I remember when my first meeting with Bill did not go well, but my last meeting with Bill, which was admittedly a while ago, actually went really well, and you could see the evolution of him. I mean, he's a father. He's, he like we all grow, and so I think he, like all of us, is really enjoyable to talk to. Like, when you get a chance to like bounce ideas off him, it doesn't happen a lot. It's very, very cool.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Shawn.
Hi. Oh.
I'm Anderson, and I was wondering if you could explain what outworking someone looks like and provide some examples from your experience.
Sorry, what my job works or in?
Outworking. As in, like, you mentioned how you outwork people.
Oh,
like,
yeah. Okay.
What does that kind of look like?
Yeah. So I was known as an intern for sleeping under my desk. So like, there's just an issue of like, I will spend 8 hours working with people in meetings, really understanding what's going on. And then other people might go home and then figure out like, oh, I'll do an hour's worth of email here and there. I might stay at work for another 3 or 4 hours, or I might go home and work for another 3 or 4 hours. I will experiment. So like, the last couple of days I've been playing around with bolt.new. I don't know if you've played with it or not, but it's this wonderful IDE that I can go to, and I can say, hey, build me a lightweight presentation tool, and it will generate me the source code for it. And then I can say, oh, I want the product to support slides up to a certain size. And so, it's basically generating this code for me. I am simply experimenting with that. That's not part of my day job, but I do that so that I can make better decisions on behalf of my team. So I sort of look at my job description and I do more. I'm curious. I'm always playing around with products. At my level, I probably shouldn't be sending mail to my team about, hey, I found this little bug here, or I think that this little bit of UX needs to be rethought. But I do it because I care. And that's sort of the example of not just being limited to your job description, but genuinely care about the company, the product, the team. Another example is, this is gonna sound really funny, but like, I have 2 jobs at Microsoft. I have the VP of PowerPoint and I have the site leadership job. I don't get paid for the site leadership job. Like, I do it because I care. And the reason I care is that when I started at Microsoft, PowerPoint was maybe 65, 70 people. We actually rented a building on the Apple campus, or right off the Apple campus. It was an Apple building. We had no company store, no cafeteria, no auditorium type stuff. It was really, really like the employee experience was very basic. But in 1999, when we ended up bringing lots of Microsoft people together in the Bay Area, we built a campus. And that campus completely changed my employee experience. I was now one of 2,000 people. And with 2,000 people come soccer games and basketball programs and auditoriums and cafeterias and all these amazing things. I saw the impact that had on me as an employee. And so when there was an opportunity where Microsoft needed a new Bay Area leader, I jumped into it because I saw the value. And so that's an example of, like, I don't get paid for it. I get no benefit from it other than the personal satisfaction that it's actually adding value. Now, the truth is, because I'm in that role, I get to come visit folks like you, because that's actually how all these connections got made. And so I am learning, hey, what's top of mind for university students? What are they worried about? And that translates into benefit in my job as the VP of PowerPoint. And so there is a, maybe not financial, but there is a feedback loop there. But yeah, working hard, you just find a problem and solve it. Find an opportunity, go learn about it. Don't be content, I think, is maybe another way to look at it.
Hi, my name is Isabella. I'm a bioengineering major. My question is, so you worked with Microsoft for most of your life, and we've heard from a lot of speakers, and a lot of them suggest, like, don't stay in a company for too long, know when to move. So my question is, what made you stay? Are you happy with your decision? And if you ever get that mentality, like the grass may be greener on the other side?
Yeah, to be clear, I would not change a thing. So looking back on it, I am so happy that I've chosen to be with Microsoft for 28 years. And there were moments. There were the startup moments in the early part of my career. There were moments where I had headhunters call and say, hey, we've got this opportunity, this other phenomenal company. Why don't you come work for us? I turned them down because, again, the opportunity I have at Microsoft is amazing. I learn every day. I'm having fun. I'm working on a product that's highly relevant. I'm constantly challenged. People I work with are phenomenal. And so for me, it's just the equation. Like, there just has not been a pull that has made it worth jumping ship to another group. And after 28 years, like, absolutely no regrets on that. But also, I'll totally admit, it's not for everyone. I'm lucky. I work at Microsoft in the Bay Area on a cool product. I've been able to do 15, 16 kind of different things in that tenure. Other people, they need the change. They want something radically different. Again, it's going to come down to personal preference and opportunities. I think the biggest thing, though, is don't chase. Always be intentional about these things. If there's something a new employer can offer you, you should explore it. Now, as a manager, I always hope my employees will come to me and say, hey, Shawn, like, I'm considering maybe moving to company X because I want this opportunity. Because that conversation then allows me to say, hey, you know what? I can give you that opportunity at Microsoft. But you should always explore options. But I also, do what makes sense for you. Don't think that there's some one single rule that's going to tell you the right way in all circumstances. Yep.
Hi, my name is Lewis. I'm a transfer student who's majoring in stats. Your story really resonates with me because I identify as a SCET student. I've struggled with wanting to drop out of school even here. So I really resonate a lot with that as well as the work ethic because I too have a very strong work ethic. My former manager would attest to the position I was working in would attest to. But my question is, how do you demonstrate or how do you connect the disparity between work ethic and education? Because the way that I see those two things, they are not at the same plane. Someone's work ethic is not directly correlated to how they perform in an academic setting.
Yeah, I believe there's absolutely no connection at all, like none, because there are some people who are just inherently brilliant. They can show up at university and they can get straight A's and ace all their classes. They may not have the same work ethic as somebody who busts their butt every day and still gets the same A's or even gets B's or C's. So I don't really sort of equate the two. I think they're very different. For me, it's one of the reasons why when I interview candidates, I'm not focused on GPAs. I'm not focused on these things. I want to get them in. I want to listen to them. I want to have the conversation around how do they approach a problem. Like when I was doing engineering interviews, I would often ask somebody, hey, build me a function that does X. And the engineer will write the function. And then I will ask them, give me another one. Like give me another implementation that can do that. And usually most candidates I can get 2 implementations out of. But what I'm really looking for is the one who will give me 3, 4, 5. Or even the one who after 2 will continue to try to find the 3rd one. Because sometimes that's more important than being able to find that 5th one. And so I think that we have to separate out hard work from grades. To be very clear, you all should go to class, you all should do super well, but from a hiring perspective, I think it's more about like getting beyond the resume and really talking to the person and understanding how do they solve problems. When they run into a roadblock, what do? If I'm unclear, will they ask me for clarification? I know that when I interviewed for my internship, I did 4 interviews and I knew I had aced it. And I had a break. I called my mom and dad at the Burger King because we had no cell phones back then. It's like, hey, I'm coming to Microsoft. Like, this is awesome. I've got 1 more interview. It's great. I go to the 5th interview, and it was the most intense interview I have ever seen. He'd ask me a question. I'd move my marker to the whiteboard, and he'd be like, oh, if you're going to start there, like, this is just a waste of time. What he was trying to do is he was trying to understand how am I going to react when somebody challenges me? Am I going to fold? Because I think he understood I clearly have imposter syndrome. So what am I going to do? Am I going to hold my own? Am I going to stay respectful? Am I going to seek clarification? And it was the hardest interview I'd ever been through. And honestly, I thought I failed. I remember going back to SeaTac Airport, calling my mom and dad, oh, false alarm, I'm not going to Microsoft this summer. But I ended up getting the job. And when I was talking to my intern manager, one of the reasons was the way I reacted in that 5th interview. I didn't cry, I didn't disengage, I didn't yell, I kept working the problem. Okay, like we can try it this way, we can try it that way. And so I think the way people show up, the way we react to experiences, I think that's much more important than anything else I can see in a resume. Yep.
Hi, Shawn. I'm Terrence. And I worked as an intern in a software company to do the AI protocol.
Cool.
So according to my experience, I want to ask you about what do you think of the relationship between AI and the product? Because now we get like continuously improving of the newest language model. So when the language model improved a lot, like we have a next generation language model like Cloud 3. Maybe 3.9 or Cloud 4. Like what should the product manager do? Because before.
I'm gonna cut you off there only because poor Shawn has like 1 minute, so it needs to be fast.
Okay. Because before we did a lot of work to do something like we need to do the fancy slides and we need to do
You
a lot of prompt.
You have to stop. Your question is there.
Okay. A lot of prompt engineering, but now we got a new model.
Yeah.
So how can we do as a product manager?
So the simple answer here is that while we track all the different models that are coming out, because each one is designed for a unique purpose, we track them all and then we evaluate them. And so there was a point where when 4.0 came out, there was a lot of like, oh, let's just move all of our AI capabilities within PowerPoint to 4.0. But what we did is we did benchmarks. And we realized that in some cases, 4.0 actually delivered a better experience, but in some cases, it actually delivered a substandard experience. So we do this on a case-by-case basis, which means our product managers need to be technical enough to be able to help the engineers understand, do I want model A or do I want model B?
Thank you so very much, Shawn. A huge round of applause.